The next question that I have is how did your neurodivergent or autistic experience intersect with your work in music therapy and academia? And did the expectations in those fields influence your experiences with burnout?
So when I was working in music therapy, so as a music therapist, in the States, that's what my training was in, my certification was in. I worked as a music therapist in a hospice setting for 10 years before I then transitioned to teaching at a university, directing a music therapy program, and basically teaching future music therapists. Uh, and so in that training, I can think back on it now, that my ADHD definitely worked to my advantage in a lot of those situations because there were those moments where I had that really great ability to do the hyper focus, detail oriented, goal oriented, puzzle solving. My brain loves a puzzle, um, and likes to see things how they fit together, how they work together. Um, could trying to put pieces, into a whole. And so when I was helping, not finalize, but redefine or kind of put more specifics in place for the music therapy program I was teaching in, it was like having students course schedules and their 4-year plans, and it's all big puzzles. And it was like, well, this has to fit here and this goes here and then this goes to this is first. I love a spreadsheet. I love like all of that, really like organized. Everything's in its place. My brain loves that. And yeah, that those abilities really helped. And those are things too, like that my employers, would have probably just looked at me as being someone who's just really dedicated and really hardworking. Um, that's just how they're wired. That's just how they are. Um, that's really great for us because you have really high output. You're really, going to work really hard. You're able to be self-motivated. You don't need a lot of hand holding. You can just go in and we give you a task and just go do it, get it done. It's like, I understand the narrative. I understand the brief. Tell me what to do. I'll get it done. As long as the instructions are clear and I'm not confused about like any kind of ambivalence, I could get it done. And so employers love that, because it makes things really easy for them. Um, but this really did make me quite susceptible to taking on more work than I could actually reasonably handle, because it looked from the outside like I was fine and everything was really easy and I could handle it really well. But a lot of these things, even as much as I enjoyed them to a certain extent, did take me a lot of time or thinking about work when I was at home. And both of those jobs are also salaried. And so you had your hours of work per week, but that didn't mean that you weren't also working when you weren't working. um, and so I did take a lot of time when I wasn't on the clock, so to speak, making sure that all of those things were right and were done the right way. Probably more than was necessary, because I was worried about making sure that the way that things presented, that it was just the way that it was supposed to be, to get it all done. So I was, at that point, I was more than willing to do it to be successful and to succeed, and to be viewed as somebody who could do it all and be reliable, someone that they didn't have to worry about. So then when I was that person that they didn't have to check on, they knew it was just going to get done. That made it easier for me to hide almost in plain sight. So even if I was getting close to burnout, or extra stressed, they didn't notice it, but then my life at home paid for it. It was that paid the price, because of the expectations of being successful at work and your job being your career, being your life, and that being, what you're told is one of the most important things because that's where the money comes from, and of course, money's apparently the most important thing. Uh, and so it didn't also help that the field of music therapy is often misunderstood or under fire, and having to constantly explain yourself and the relevance of what you do and why it's important, to so many people that you felt like you had to be on all the time, because you were a representation of that field and of a larger group of people, and so you had to be a certain way. As soon as someone found out you're a music therapist, you felt like I am representing something much bigger than myself, and if I don't present in the right way, that I'm going to ruin it for maybe somebody else in the future. And so there was a lot of pressure, um, to be on all the time. So when you have to rationalize yourself, it's like you can never be doing enough work. You can never, say yes enough times to all the requests, because it's like, well, if I do this now, that might help somebody in the future. And, if that makes it easier for somebody else, I'm more than happy to take the brunt now, but which is great. But obviously there's a cost to that. So I could see, so when I transitioned from being working in the field to being at the university, I could easily see after the 10 years, see myself in the students and the interns that I also trained, about 15 interns while I was in the field, could relate to their experiences. And by having gone through what I did, hopefully was able to help them do it in a better way, in the sense of, uh, not better practice way, but a better boundaries way, better ways for them to take care of themselves and not experience the same levels of burnout that I had experienced, and knowing when it was enough, and when, this is, it was 5 o'clock, especially when you're an intern, it was like 5 o'clock, done. Don't feel like you have to do anything else, because also you weren't getting paid. So it was like, it's 5 o'clock, your time is done. Don't be working all night and then come in the next day and work for another how many hours. It was set those boundaries, be kind to yourself, and, take care of those things. And so I hopefully, hopefully, that would be one of the things that, my previous interns and students would say that I was really, good about teaching them, was how to take care of themselves. Because goodness knows that I was not always the best at doing it myself, even though I knew I was not the greatest at it. If I could instill that to any level in my students and help them be more successful in preventing, stress and burnout as much as possible, I mean, hopefully I was able to do that for them, um, so that they could, keep doing what they loved as well.
I think that's really good that you were able to share that lived experience with your students as you transitioned, excuse me, into being a professor. And one of the questions that I had too is, did you find yourself um, feeling like you needed to be a representation of music therapy because a lot of people may not understand what it is and the impact of it, so you have to justify this is why this is important, like this is a big deal, and then people may not see it that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was just one of those things that, like, this is really important. What we do is really valid. Um, there is, there's a lot of science to back it up. People, you can look at, it's one of those things, you look at something and think, oh, that's nice. But when you actually sit down to learn about it or understand every single choice that's being made by a music therapist has a point, has a purpose, even if you can't see what it is, like, there is purpose to every single thing that's done, um, with whoever you're working with. And it was like just trying to tell people, it's like, no, this is actually, I mean, we're just trying to do really good things, and trying to break down these barriers so that people understand it's not just fluff, and it's, um yeah, it's valid and it's important. And, I just wish more people, yeah, I just yeah, it was like a lot of energy and a lot of space having to, like, portray, someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had to that, but then had to explain it to other people that you knew exactly what you were doing, so that they thought you were, who you're trying to portray yourself to be.
That makes sense. So you made a significant shift from working as a music therapist and university professor to becoming a hand-sewn kilt maker and office administrator. So what inspired that transition? I know you've shared a little bit about that. And what was the process of making that change like for you?
So definitely had a significant shift in my working life from music therapy to not music therapy at all when we moved to Scotland. I was all ready to do music therapy when we moved here. I had gotten the um, approval and the licensure to practice music therapy in the UK. I'd done all that paperwork and everything that was required of me to be able to practice that here. And so when I first got here, the idea was that, well, if I can find something in music therapy or kind of music therapy adjacent, that makes that transition for work life easier. Excuse me. So I was all ready to do it, but realized that where we live was going to have a major impact on my ability to do that job because we live somewhat remotely from larger cities, which is where most of the music therapists in the UK work, unless you work for yourself. And I was not in a place to work for myself, music therapy in a totally different country. And I would have to be driving quite a bit, or we would have had to pick somewhere else to live in the first place. And we picked where we moved not based on what jobs we were going to have, because the timeline of visas, there was no one going to hire me 6 months in advance for something that may or may not come to fruition. So we knew where we were going to live first, and then we just knew jobs would follow after. So and then when I moved as well, I had to learn how to drive a manual car or a stick shift car. So knowing I wasn't going to have access to a car immediately also made that my ability to stay in music therapy less likely. Um, Part of the point of the move as well, though, was that, we're going to be here, we're going to live, we're going to whatever, we're obviously going to work. But I wasn't at that point picky about what type of job I was going to have. It was just any job will do. Eventually, find, settle into something. But I was all prepared to be able to do music therapy if and when that opportunity arose. Uh, and so when we moved, I actually first worked at a hotel I did wait staff and reception, which is a great experience. Absolutely. I mean, I learned a lot at that job, especially just culturally. Um, it was a great job. And the manager there, she was amazing. And I was so grateful that she, looked at my resume and was like, this is a bit odd, but yeah, sure. If you're willing to do the work, I was like, more than willing to do the work. And so as soon as you got in there, she's like, oh, well, I'm glad we hired you. I said, I also appreciate that because I really needed a job. But that she like took a risk on me essentially, because my resume was not at all aligned with hospitality. But it worked out fine, and it was a foot in the door. Before we moved, I had signed up and knew I was going to be taking a kilt making course. It was once a week, every Saturday, like from September to February, March of that first year that we were there. So I traveled down from where we live down to Edinburgh on the train every week to take that class, to be trained as a kilt maker, mostly because I thought it would be fun. I just thought I might enjoy that, from obviously my family background, but also my background in Highland dance as well. I just thought, oh, it'd be really interesting and really cool if I knew how to make a kilt. But having also done that led then to being able to get a job as a hand sewn kilt maker in the town next to where we lived, only 6 miles away, because there happens to be a tartan producer in that city, which worked out really well. So I got hired there to be a kilt maker when they had orders for hand sewn kilts, but also then just to work in their shop, and to do kind of administrative tasks as well. I had office jobs in the past as such, growing up. in high school and at university. But they were just, jobs that you had as a student because you needed money. But I could do the job. And so that just kind of fell into place there. And so now I work there and do officey things and work in this tartan shop, which is amazing. I love it. It's really great. And then I get to make kilts as well. So it was definitely just one of those things that I had to be open to doing something different, but that also I think aligned itself with what I felt like was a job I could do long term. Also, the idea that it was a job that I could leave at work and I wasn't bringing home. Most of the work is also, regardless of where it was going to be, anyways, was going to be hourly. So it helped me to set that more firm of a boundary. And these are hours I'm working, these are the hours I'm getting paid. So if I do anything besides that, I'm not getting compensated, which means I could probably spend my time not working. And so when I come home, I don't have to think about work, which helps with a lot of things. And just being able to be present for my family and having time off for that. But most people, yeah, would look at that and think, wow, that is like way different, totally opposite. Like, what even was that? But I thought about it a lot, really how that even works. But I think I've always, I think I mentioned to you before, but this idea of duality that I've always kind of felt in my life, that there's like different things that shouldn't work together, but for me they do. Like if someone were to look at like that shouldn't go with that, but that's just generally how I feel like I was built. So music obviously is like arts based, very creative, and then the therapy side of that was very kind of psychology, sciencey, analytical. And so it was like the creative and the science, the arts and the science together. And it was like, great, that works. And that also like played into different strengths I had of like the musical output, but also the enjoyment of organization and structure. And those things just went together, and so that was great. And so kilt making is, I mean, is in and of itself an art or a creative expressive kind of outlet. So I mean, so I sew by hand, but also I mean, tartan has the pattern on it, and so you have to line things up just right. Specifically, like putting a kilt together is almost like a puzzle in and of itself. So there's that creative and that artsy bit, and then there is like a maths and kind of science bit, and so that just that works together. And so that really works for my brain. My brain likes those things combined. And so, yeah, even though they're totally different, way off fields, overall, like the components of them, like for me, really work together. And so, while yeah, it seems really out of left field, for me, it really works. But it's also to me another way of saying like my job is not my identity, and my job is not a career or what something is not like the most important thing about me or my life. And I can have a degree and I can have this or that, but that's not going to be the most important thing about defining who I am.
And as far as that shift too, it's important to recognize that there are so many transferable skills, and a lot of times we can get stuck in this rigidity with our career or our life where this is what I went to school for, so this is what I have to do for the rest of my life, when sometimes you learn that you do need to make that pivot for your well-being. And the other thing that I wanted to ask is this wasn't new to you sewing, right? Because I know you personally, and so you have a little bit of a background with sewing, but that was more of a hobby, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, I've done spin a lot of different areas. I took a class. I mean, my mom taught me some, and then I had a course in high school. But then in high school, I was with the theater things I was involved in, did a lot of costume design, and then I did community theater in the couple of years right before we moved as well. Before I had our daughter, that I also did some costume work for as well. Obviously, that was most machine stuff, but yeah, I've done. sewing types of crafty things before. Also quite like a good bit of crochet. Not exactly the same as sewing, but in that crafty kind of creative realm.
Hmm. And I wanted to check in quick because I know that we scheduled for an hour. Are you fine continuing?
Yes, that's fine. I've got the time, so that's fine.
Okay. All right. So you moved to Scotland during this period of change. How did relocating to a country with different cultural and societal expectations influence your work, well-being, or experience of burnout? We covered this a little bit.
We did. Yeah. So, yeah, obviously, I mean, it was a huge transition, a huge change
Hmm.
moving to Scotland. It really was a major shift in work. Not only literally what the work I was doing, but how I viewed work and how I viewed what work represented in my life. You had mentioned too something about the way that people kind of viewed your experience and transferable skills. And, I think I struggled sometimes with knowing that I know my resume looks the way it looks because of what I did and how, in America, you have, your training and this, and it should be exactly right and should fit in the same pieces. And I found that to an extent here as well. When we first got here, I did have 2 interviews with music adjacent fields. I think because my resume looked music heavy, obviously music based field related. And so, but if I tried to apply for anything else that wasn't specifically music related, that I didn't often get an interview, even though based on the job description, I said, I know I can do this job. I have the skills to be able to do this. Obviously, it's not the exact same, but I've used computers, I've used Microsoft, I've used all these different things, all these programs and things a lot. And so just because it didn't seem to exactly fit, or in their mind, they couldn't wrap their head around how that was possible. They didn't even take the time to talk to me, to ask follow up questions, to have an interview. And so some of that, especially when like the first couple months we were here, was really disheartening. And this is before, it was like in the first year that we were here that I um, found my diagnosis. But so even before that, I was like, I remember just feeling so anxious and so worked up and being like, I should be able to get a job. I should be able to provide for my family. And if, like, what am I doing here if I can't do that? And getting really down on myself for not being able to achieve and provide uh, and, exceed expectations. Uh, and so it is a bit of a challenge where sometimes I've been able to obviously find work and work that I enjoy, but it is still a bit of a challenge that you find a lot of employers that still do, especially if they don't, maybe let's say they have a lot of applicants, they're like, well, yours just seems the least relevant, so we're just not even going to bother. But if they, if they took the time to understand you even a little bit, that they would see um, that you could do the job, that the skills are transferable. So you try to get that across as much in a cover letter as you can, but it is really hard, I think, to since we seem to, you seem to find too, I think that especially if you have people who are kind of just very straightforward um, in those positions that are doing the hiring and HR things, that if it doesn't immediately like light up to them, if they can't find certain keywords, that it's just like everything gets passed by. And so it is hard, just even applying and getting jobs. And I know that's not maybe just a unique thing here as well. I know in the States, some people can't even get hired at fast food chains. And it's just really like, I want to work, I want a job, and I can't even get in front of anybody. And so, I feel that more here definitely than I have before. And so I'm even more sympathetic to understanding, what that's like. Um, so it was, until we got into working in places. And my partner was trained as an educator, um, and he worked in a variety of different jobs over the years. But when we moved here, he now works so we call here as care worker, but so in America we call that like a home health aide. So he works at a nursing home, and he's so great at that job. He loves it. It's amazing. But it was just one of those, happened to be that the care home he's applied for was desperate enough for basically anybody that they were like, well, we'll give him an interview. We'll see what happens. And they got in there, but he totally different type of job that he's doing as well. But that he also really loves it. He enjoys it. He loves the work with the residents, and he's so good with them. But it's also important too that the way we've just changed our life in that I'm still able to get our daughter off to school every day. He's able to pick her up from school. We don't need we structure our life in a way that we're not overextending ourselves, that we are able to give ourselves again more of that space and that time, and that understanding of what we need to be able to do to provide without it having to go to a job that necessarily has to be 40 some hours a week, or has to be weekends, or has to be evening availability, so that we can actually spend more time together.
That definitely is a challenging part of making a shift in a career. I can also relate going from public education to pursuing other things. And I've also had opportunities where people have just taken risks on me and trusted that, oh, well, we'll see. And sometimes you need that in life. And I hope to see more of that in workspaces where people do understand that skills are transferable and you just because you worked doing something for so long, it is possible to shift and apply those skills in different ways.
Absolutely. I know even people who I've known that have worked in music therapy that have then gotten out of the field and tried to just get other jobs in anything else or other fields that they felt like they would have been compatible with, even have a hard time again getting interviews. And it's like, just because my only work experience is in this field, it doesn't mean that I'm not capable of doing other things. And so sometimes it's just so hard to get employers and people that are looking at the resumes and the applications to see that, and to understand that and to take those risks. And sometimes they just miss out on awesome people that they, didn't know they could have had.
Absolutely. So, looking back on your life, what is something that is part of your autistic identity that you're proud of, but may have been overlooked or even criticized by non-autistic people?
So this question in particular, I think I've really struggled with the most when I was looking at these questions before the interview. I think because I have a hard time. This sounds so silly, but anyways, I have a hard time feeling proud of myself. I think I've always but I think I've always been able to have like an innate internal like sense of knowing
Mm.
and gut instinct about things that I had a difficult time like describing or verbalizing, but still somewhat knowing it was there and listening to it, that allowed me to never end up in really bad situations. Um, and so even though I had felt like I had to play a part or be a certain way, there was still something when things came up that I was like, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't fit. That doesn't seem like something I I should say yes to or I should do. Just certain times in life, I just knew that's not for me. I'm not going to go along with that. And I remember times when I can't think of anything specific, but just I remember having these feelings of like when someone would ask me to do something, and I just like, no, I'm not going to do that. And they were like, oh, what do you mean you're not going to do that? And I said, no, that doesn't. That's not for me. That doesn't feel right. And because the reaction I normally would give to people is, yep, absolutely, I'll do that, whatever you need. And so when I did set a boundary because I just had a feeling about something, that it would put people, it would set people back and kind of like, oh, well, you're not meeting my expectations. And so then I had all this guilt and all this whatever about it. But I still, I held firm on those. But I think that somehow, it's so hard for me to like really understand or describe like what that is. Um, but something about being able to, even if I didn't know or I couldn't verbalize it, that I had a sense of knowing in myself that I could still be authentic, that I could um, just not even have to have a reason to be forced into a situation, um, or portray something different outwardly than when I was masking, that it was my, like, that was, I felt like was my actual self. And so I think people again were like kind of taken aback by that, or looked at that as like, ooh, we don't like that about you. Or if it was something that they were trying to get out of me, that my autistic self, like, in a sense, knew like that's not me and that's a step too far, for even all the masking that I did. And so I do actually you know feel, in those moments when I was able to do that, I do feel proud that I something in me helped me stay true to myself, and to trust myself in a lot of times when I let other people kind of tell me what I needed to be. That there were still times in my life that I could stand up for myself and be authentic, even though at the time I had no idea what that actually was. Or I couldn't even describe it. I still have a hard time actually figuring out describing what that is, but I think, um, being able to be authentic with what my instincts are telling me, um, I think I'm still really proud of that I'm able to do that.
It can be hard to have this feeling inside of you that something isn't right for you or it doesn't fit. And because you want to fit in and please other people, then you go along with it. And to avoid any friction or confrontation, like it would make sense that you would minimize that. So it is hard to challenge other, in a way, challenge other people or even employers where they ask you to do something that you're not comfortable with because you know yourself. Would that, does this kind of
Yes,
resonate with what? Okay.
yes. There's all these words. I think it has to do something with even though outwardly a lot I was trying to be who everybody wanted me to be, I still didn't compromise my morals and my standards
Mhm.
and my sense of even like justice in those different ways. It was like, this doesn't align with me. This doesn't align with just that really like deep down internal, just like that central part of who you are. And so even though like outwardly I could pretend and I could whatever, it was like if it got down to things that were compromising that, it was like that was too far. I was protecting that part of myself that was like, no, this is me and this is who I am and I feel strongly about this. And so regardless of what else I compromise in my life, like that is going to be, that's not going to get, that's, you're not breaching that barrier, essentially.
And that's a powerful thing to finally be able to voice that and hold that boundary and stay firm in that position. So, last question. How do your special interests show up in your life now? Have they changed over the years? And have they played a role in shaping your work, whether in music, kilt making, or other pursuits?
I can definitely see, yeah, what we would call as special interests that come up so often in my life. Uh, it's interesting. I've always, to an extent, felt like I've never quite belonged in a lot of spaces, like that just feeling of like I don't fit. I don't. There's something that just doesn't, totally feel like you belong where you ended up at. Um, and also part of that comes from, I think, representing things that, like we talked about, the duality, things that shouldn't instinctively go together. So obviously that came out in my work that I talked about, but also just growing up, I was really involved in music and choir and theater, very artsy things. And then I was also quite active in sporty things because I was did cheerleading. And people look at those two things and like, you did both of those? I was like, yes. They're like, oh, that's interesting. Because there were very few people that did both of those things where I grew up. It was either one or the other. And it was definitely not, there was not much crossover. So people just thought, okay, that's weird. Uh, and then in college, obviously, I trained as a music therapist, but was also really involved in, again, very artsy, creative kind of area, but then also really involved in my time at college in, again, more physical activity things. So I was on dance team for a while, got actually into going with one of my roommates to did a lot of CrossFit things and was training for a triathlon. And did some of that during college. And again, certain things that just didn't seem like they would have necessarily gone together. And then obviously went into most what we call a creative field. But I definitely overall felt like I was definitely less creatively skilled and more like discipline and organized focused. So while I could do the music thing, um, I I still always felt like I just never felt like I was a creative-ish type person. I loved music and all those things, but I was never like really good at songwriting or really good at improvising. And just kind of like stuff would just come out of my brain. It wasn't music wise. It was just, I could do it. I could learn it. I could, um, get it really right and then kind of put it back out there. But it wasn't creative in the ways that I saw a lot of my um, fellow students and professionals being creative in the same way. And so it was, I think, where I ended up in my career with that still allowed me to be engaged with the music part of it and the other part of it for me, that like those two things work together. And if it was just going to be so much of the music creative part, that wasn't where my like all of my strengths lied. So it needed that other part to balance it out. And because even when I was considering degrees and things like that, I almost went into architecture or accounting as like career choices, which are definitely more of that analytic brain focus thing. But there's obviously something about that just having that part without something else wasn't right either. And so I ended up finding that right balance of the analytical part of my brain and the creative part of my brain. Um, and then again, being while I was a music therapist in the field, also being an intern supervisor, which was kind of like a way of like one-on-one teaching, which then led into me working at the university as a professor, which was then like bigger group teaching. And so it just kind of all went, like one thing kind of led to another, and things that just kind of made sense. So looking back, I can see that music and then teaching, and then outside interests, but all that kind of art and science together type of thing. So kilt making, again, I said it's kind of no different with kind of a creative bit and like an engineering kind of maths thing together. So I still get, so even though I'm not working like in a music specific field, I still get music in other ways. We've still got a piano. So I play quite often for myself. I haven't done many of them. I've gone to a couple, but at one of our local pubs up the street in the town, they do traditional music sessions every Tuesday night. There's loads of other music kind of things going on around town. There's in America you'd call it like community theater, but here they call it most of them are like amateur operatic societies. So it's never really opera, it's musicals. But that's just what they're called, or just a musical society. So I did my first show here just last month, which is a really great opportunity, really exciting. And then recently, since moving here as well, I've rediscovered my love of reading. which I think just gets squashed down when I was at college because you're reading so much for classes and reading so much for actual learning and grades and all these things. And then when you're in the, professional, you're reading. I was, as a teacher, as a professor, I was reading for prepping for classes, and I, forgot in all that time actually like reading for fun. And so once I figured that out again, I've just been like reading all the time. In the last couple of years, I've read like nearly 70 books each year. I just am like, I've just gone off the deep end, which is great. I love it though. It's fabulous. So I think like in the last 2.5 years, I've read over 200 books, which is, I mean, it's an insane number. I think it's crazy, but it's so good. And it's just like rediscovering these things that even maybe I used to love that I can, bring back into my life as something that, remembering that I enjoy these things and doing these things for myself. And it doesn't have to be, it, those special interests don't have to be related to my work, that they can just be outside of my work. Because then sometimes when you have it be your main part of work, then you do, to an extent, some people, myself included, though, lose what kind of makes that special for you if you're having to do it all the time. And so being able to take that out of every day, 8 hours a day, and make that my special thing that I get to choose to spend time on, makes it that much more special for me, I think. And so getting involved with that type of thing as well. And yeah, I think that's the
I've
gist of
no I've noticed that for myself too, when because my special interest was teaching and education, and then I had all of these other special interests that I kind of forgot about because all of my energy was going to that one thing, and then I was so burnt out from the masking and the demands that everyone had of me and pouring everything into my work where when I stepped away from that, I had a period where I had to figure out, well, what do I even like? Who am I? And I was wondering if you had something like that, like how you discovered, oh, wait, I do love reading. I just didn't have the time.
Absolutely. What you just said was like, yeah, that sounds exactly like what I was doing. I mean, my partner and I too, we, to an extent, we got together because of our shared interest and love of music. But because I went into a field that was so music heavy and me having to kind of be on and perform during the day, we rarely then played music together. We had this big shared interest, but then it just kind of went by the wayside because I just, after working with it all day, I was just spent and I was like, I can't do it anymore. It feels like work. And so having been able to step aside from that as my main thing, has helped me enjoy it again more. And it has become more meaningful for me. And yeah, it was just, you get home and you're just so just tired all the time. You're just like, it is just like a doom scroll time. It was just like,
Absolutely.
you had no mental capacity for anything else. Um, and so it was, yeah, it's been quite different to be like, yeah, what do even I do with my time, especially because here I have more of it. And so it was like, well, I'm gonna have to figure out something to do with it. So I'll go through these spurts of, obviously I read quite a bit. But then I also kind of go in these spurts of, if I think of a crochet project I want to work on, I'll kind of get sucked into that. Or uh maybe like 6 months ago, I was really into baking. I mean, I still bake quite a bit. I was making a cake this morning for a coworker, but like with I've always had a love hate relationship with like yeasted dough, where if I can get it to work, it's great, but half the time I end up killing the yeast, and then it's crap. But like I'll just get, realize that like actually I do enjoy that, especially when I'm not feeling rushed and I have time to like think about it and focus on it in the way that I feel like it deserves. Like, can get so much more enjoyment out of other things. We do a lot of also, we live really close to a lot of lovely like naturey areas and close to the Cairngorm National Park, and just love taking walks outside together. There's a lovely beach not far away, North Sea, that we also love to just go and walk on, and just spending time outside. That it doesn't feel, it's not like hours and hours away, and that you can just get outside and clear your head and not have to think about so many things. It's, I don't know, it's just a whole different shift. And it is so much of the reason behind why we did what we did when we moved. It was, we thought about it so much. And I thought years ago we would have had to get work visas to move. And then it's like, well, I'll put that by the wayside. And then it was actually my partner who figured out I could get a passport here and have citizenship. I thought, oh, great. And then, a year after that or whatever, he's like, you think we should move to Scotland? I said, what? I said, yeah, that'd be great. But like, I thought for sure in my head that ship had sailed. But he was more than ready for it. And so I said, okay, let's do it. And then we had a 5-year plan, which turned into a 2.5-year plan. And here we are. And it's just been, it has spurred, it was it's just a transition that spurred so many things. So changes in career, changes in personal life, changes in, just understanding who I am. And I'm, again, so grateful that we were able to do that, to have all of these amazing outcomes. And it's been one heck of a journey. But I'm so grateful for it.
It sounds like that transition from the US to Scotland was so crucial in you being able to figure out who you are and like kind of let your guard down and like explore, like have fun again. And even though it was challenging,
Yeah.
not trying to minimize that, but
Oh no, it was. The amount of paperwork was insane. It's fine. But it made it there in the end. But it was, it was just something. And again, so privileged that we were able to do that, because it changed so much of our lives for the better. And yeah, I know not everybody can make a huge major life shift like that, to be able to have that space. But, I just hope, I hope that, again, with more people talking about it and more, in a sense, education, that people have these conversations, that people think about what it is that they need in their life, and hopefully can make adjustments on some level to be able to improve their lives even that much more, that just to help themselves have space or understand, what it is they need, to be able to be, successful and not get to those, burnout points.
and that was why I wanted to highlight your story too, because I think it's a good example of how you can make a transition, even though it's scary and kind of kind of daunting, because it does come with a lot of work in the back end of like the paperwork and then the transitions with expectations, but you're finding that that change in lifestyle and location has been so beneficial for you and your family. And so I'm so grateful for you being here today with me and sharing this with our audience. And I hope that your story inspires them that it is possible to take that risk or pivot, or maybe even give them an idea of something to pursue.
Absolutely. I appreciate your time as well. Thank you so much.
All right.